So welcome to the Q&A section. I'm Tom Korn from our Security Business Unit, and I'm joined by our esteemed Chief Operating Officer and President, Sanjay Poonen. Sanjay, thank you so much for joining us for this. Now, look, global events, most notably the global pandemic we have going on, are driving massive change. Enterprises are forced to find new ways of getting work done, whether it's innovating in service delivery to their customers or entertaining workforce flexibility, or it's hard to deny that we're in a state of massive change. But I guess what we wanted to talk with you about is a little bit, what does this mean for security and IT teams? And to start the discussion in this world of change and where we're accelerating so much of these digital transformation efforts, what are you hearing from customers, particularly from security organizations?
Tom, always a pleasure to talk to you. And this is certainly unprecedented times. 15 years ago, I worked at Symantec and had some experience after that working on GRC products at SAP. So it's been a while since I've been talking actively to CISOs. And the last year, I told myself I would try to talk to 1,000 CISOs this year. So about 40% through that goal. I don't know if I'll quite get to 1,000, but it's been incredibly illuminating. And these are usually, companies that know us, VMware, very well. So we have a very good audience with the CIOs, but we probably haven't been top of mind to the CISOs, although they have tremendous respect for us. Number one, I think, listen, when you have a currency of products that already work and you have a trusted advisor status, these CISOs are really willing to listen. I've not had, except maybe for 2 or 3, any customer give me the Heisman that they're not been willing to listen to me. I think they all want to build a kind of a trusted relationship because trust goes alongside security, and they want to have a partner that can work with them because no one company is going to solve it. So I think the first thing that I have heard very much from customers is this desire to build a trusted relationship with companies that could help them solve this problem at scale. They are certainly doing this with small companies, but when I ask them who is strategic to you, they very rarely mention anybody that's, I would say that is substantive. So I think the opportunity to really build a trusted relationship is one. That's why we seek to be one of those key ones. Secondly, I think there's a tremendous amount of frustration I've sensed from CISOs on tool proliferation. Dozens, 50, one CISO of a major Fortune 50 company told me he had 125 security tools. And this just is getting to be way too cumbersome in terms of the labor involved, the cost involved, number of agents, number of consoles, number of kind of alerts, all of this stuff adds up. So reduction with some thoughtful way, not just saying vendor consolidation. Vendor consolidation is easy, but if you're best of breed and a lot more integrated in our world, zero trust or intrinsic, that's a strong proposition. And then I think the third one's kind of relevant to our time, which is, people are asking me a lot about what is this sort of through COVID, post-COVID world going to look like for a distributed workforce? What is security with a work-at-home environment going to look like? What are you hearing from other clients? And we have a very, very good point of view there, given the fact we've been talking about things like end-user computing and work at the speed of life, and now the intersection of security with that. How does endpoint security classify? So very exciting times, Tom, and these are 2 or 3 of the things that I've heard from customers.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating times. It's I suppose, much like you're saying, many of these things are not. It's not like we haven't seen workers from home. We've just never seen this magnitude and scale of things. Right. So maybe along these lines, we're certainly seeing more and more people find things like cloud security solutions become very attractive in this time where everyone is sort of working from home, and the extended enterprise is much bigger part of our infrastructure than even internally. But there's also a lot of companies with a big reliance on private cloud and on-premise security and IT infrastructure. How, in your discussions with customers, how do you talk about how VMware solutions can bridge the gap between these?
Yeah, typically I talk about, there's 20 areas in enterprise security you could focus on, and between them probably a few thousand vendors. But we've picked 4 areas that we think we can really excel at. And I tell them, listen, many of the other 15 or 16 that I don't talk about, we're going to partner with best of breed partners. I think part of what we've sought to do is really focus in a few and do them really well. Network, endpoint, cloud, and analytics, the telemetry generated from all those first 3. Those are the 4. And when I can talk with some level of detail behind what's going on inside each of those, It doesn't take very long to describe a thumbnail or what we're doing in them. I usually able to describe that in 10 or 15 minutes, of course, with the desire to go deeper. I think as you related to this particular area of cloud security is certainly a top consideration. And there's one aspect of it, which is the posture management and everything that happens in managing the cost and security of the cloud. We do that very well in the Cloud Health platform, including a module of that called Secure State. But another aspect of it is also what you described about, which is in this dichotomy of private cloud and public cloud, being able to secure workloads, which is a workload could be a server that's virtualized in VMware, a container that's sort of, running on-prem in a private cloud or in the cloud, or a virtual machine running inside AWS EC2 or Azure Compute. And that could be a Windows or a Linux server. VMware has tremendous amount of knowledge of workloads. I mean, that's kind of what we lived for 20 years of understanding server virtualization. Containers now will become the leading in enterprise containers. And traditionally, we find when they talk to customers, the traditional endpoint security people think a lot more about laptops and devices and not as strongly and well about what are the dynamics. So some of the things that we talked about last year and we'll be delivering on very soon, like agentless capability, integrating the server hypervisors, container security at scale, not just static but runtime analysis. Many of these things, and then also deep integration to AWS and Azure, because listen, we live in the world of AWS and Azure. They are deep partners of us. So understanding how does EC2 and Azure Compute really work, that server landscape, I think there'll be more endpoints on the workload side than there are endpoints on the client side, just because of the proliferation of these workloads. So that's how we tend to think about this private cloud and public cloud dichotomy, Tom. And we found in my conversations with customers, and of course, some of the announcements that we anticipate showing up at VMworld in a few weeks and coming up later on this second half of the year with innovation on the Carbon Black platform, is going to be absolutely groundbreaking.
Yeah, I could not be more excited about some of the things we're going to be launching around workload security at the conference next month. I think people are going to be blown away. One of the topics that isn't talked often enough is we talk about all the workers being remote, but it's also the security teams who are now remote. And that, when the SOC can no longer be a physical place, how does the SOC become a virtual place? Do you see this as another attractive benefit of delivering security from the cloud, that the SOC sort of can become almost a virtual concept? And might that help organizations beyond just this pandemic?
Yeah, I think one of the things before you even get to the SOC, I've been asking, we have one of the largest, private cloud deployments of any vendor, because 70 million virtual machines, of those 60 run in private clouds, and the biggest private clouds in the world run on VMware, whether it's the biggest banks, the biggest telcos, media companies, the ones who spend the most on private clouds. And I've been asking both our professional services team and those customers, hey, how's it going through? Because you can't send people to data center, even though they're essential workers. And it's amazing to me, inside our 2,500 person consulting organization, we've had to send 25 people on site to maintain private clouds, because a lot of this is software defined, remote managed, lifecycle managed so efficiently that you can do remotely. So we understand virtualization. I mean, the benefits of virtualization to a data center was you could do a lot of this, that you didn't have to go in and install hardware. You could do a lot of the software. So before you even get to a virtual SOC, realize that VMware's tremendous experience in managing private clouds, data centers at scale through software, and helping our customers now manage that even before they get to AWS and Azure, which are public clouds that are certainly doing that at scale. Now you bring in the notion of how does a security operations team and the modern day SOC operate. Clearly, they're all working from home. So providing them virtual technologies to run their life, whether it's virtual desktops, Horizon, virtual security, that's all super important to their working life as it is to you and me. But then to the extent that the deployment of the tools that they use, whether it's networking technologies, whether it's endpoint security solutions, cloud security, are cloud-based, they get the benefit of being able to deploy that in a much easier, faster way, including the onboarding of new employees. Okay, so either you're an existing employee and you took your laptop home, but think about a new employee who started sometime during this pandemic. They receive over mail, FedEx or UPS, a box that has their laptop. They've got to onboard. You want them to onboard in 5 or 10 or 15 minutes. They don't have all of this time and an IT person coming to them. we're able to do that really quickly with Workspace ONE, and then deploy on that same laptop that either went home or came to them via mail all of the appropriate security technologies, whether it's Carbon Black for endpoint security, network acceleration from VeloCloud, and we're thinking a lot about where that goes in a cloud security architecture. We think that we can completely transform that security at work proposition for an average employee that's already been at work and going home, or a new employee who starts. And nobody is being able to really rethink that from all of the touch points, whether it's the virtual desktop technologies, the endpoint security solutions, the web gateway solutions, all of that need to come together. And we're in a tremendous vantage point of being able to have done some of this before very well and rethought how this is built for software and cloud. Traditional hardware approaches don't work for this. Traditional client server approaches don't work for this. You have to rethink this from scratch, and we're in a very good position to do that. And more coming on that topic at VMware.
Yeah, no, very exciting. I'm very excited about that. So while we're shifting for this, so are the bad actors, right? We've seen a 238% increase in attacks in tandem with the news cycle. We've seen ransomware increase by 900% over the last several months since the pandemic came about. We've seen a huge increase in islet hopping, moving from suppliers into organizations. Why there's a lot of talk, and you've spoken a lot about this unified approach to security and IT management and the benefits of all the teams working together to really battle this. And we certainly, as you mentioned in the beginning, have access to very unique control points to be able to cover from sort of all the different angles. I'm wondering if you could speak to a little bit about how, not just what Carbon Black is doing, but how Carbon Black is doing in tandem with the NSX team, with the Workspace ONE team, is really valuable on this problem.
Yeah, I think, when I've talked to customers, one of the things that I've noticed right now is, I often ask the security leader that I'm talking to, maybe it's a CISO, so often it's the CIO and the CISO. Most often the CISO reports to the CIO. That's kind of how it is at VMware. Sometimes the CISO, I find, reports to the head of legal or directly to the CFO, but most often they are underneath the IT. But there's often a chasm between the CISO and the CTO who owns technology infrastructure, and increasingly I'm starting to find those kind of coming. In a few places I've seen the CTO and the CISO merge into one function. They call themselves Chief Technology and Security Officers. And that's actually a good thing, because a lot of the technology infrastructure has security in it. For example, network security, firewalls. Is it owned by the CISO or the technology guy? Is the load balancers? And this is one where technology officers, the SOC generally tends to be a lot more owned by the CISO. So the one thing I have noticed is the coming together of IT and security, certainly in a drive towards collaboration, where if they're two separate people, the CTO and the CISO, they have to work together. But in some cases, I'm starting to know them become merged functions under one person, whether they report to the CIO or they are kind of the mini CIO themselves. And I think that's really good for us, because that allows technologies like networking and security to come closer together. The connection of endpoint and network security, EDR meets NDR, is this new concept that we're calling XDR. That's, I think, also getting a lot of reception from the analysts. And it also allows other parts of infrastructure teams, for example, end user computing teams. At VMware, we have a CTO, we have a CISO, and we have a head of end user computing. They're often peers. Now, these three people have to work together. Sometimes they might be all coalesced into one team, reporting to the CIO. But the more that these teams, and the end user computing person is usually owning all of virtual desktops, endpoint management, collaboration tools, all of those need to now be infused with security inside it. Now, sometimes obviously, you could see all of them, kind of coalescing with the security. But I think the most successful CISOs have built very strong partnerships on one side with the people who own end user computing, identity management, all of those capabilities that touch an end user and their entities. And on the other side with the technology infrastructure that's going way down to the data center. And if they built a good relationship there, it's a beautiful thing to watch that collaboration happen. Now at VMware, We're talking to all of them. Traditionally, we've talked to the CIO, who's at the top of all this, and we have fantastic relationships, maybe, as good as Microsoft's or everybody else. Who've talked a lot to the CIOs. We have very good relations with the CTOs who own infrastructures. And over the last 5 or 6 years, thanks to the success of Workspace ONE and our end user computing business, we have great relations with the end user computing team. Now, in the middle of that is a CISO. We've had growing relationships with them, but quite frankly, it's been a breakthrough now that we have NSX and Carbon Black at scale. Hundreds and thousands of CISOs are starting to recognize that VMware is that security vendor, that's the dark horse, that's probably got a good likelihood of being the leader in that space in due course because of a number of events that have happened, including the fading away of legacy players that are not innovating anymore. It's provided a perfect opportunity for a disruptive, innovative player like VMware to come in and sort of say, listen, we have a new vision. As some of these legacy players have hit a wall or faded away or got acquired and no longer innovating and their good employees are leaving their company, enter VMware with a new vision of what we could do. That's zero trust or intrinsic security. Those are synonyms for us of how we think about the security landscape. And it's having a lot of very good resonance with both customers and the analysts who cover the space.
Yeah, it's funny. Some of the integrations that we've been working on that I'm most excited about are about sharing context between teams, so that there's a common source of truth. That old expression, it's okay for you to have your own opinion, it's not okay for you to have your own facts. Even just giving this common fact base across those teams, I think has a big impact on that. Let me pick up on one of the last things you said about seeing VMware more significantly as a security company. And I had two questions, but maybe these are best combined. We're not traditionally thought of as a security company. I think I read an article, an interview with you, in which someone referred to VMware as the best kept security secret, right? Do you maybe you could elaborate a little bit on this transformation of VMware into one of the largest security companies in the world, and this sort of this shift that people starting to think about VMware around security. I mean, would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think, Tom, it's not uncommon when a company moves into a new space, you start off relatively unknown, but you have to persist. 6, 7 years ago, when we acquired AirWatch, and I was fortunate to lead that part of our business when I was running end user computing, I had customers who knew us in the data center saying, what the heck are you doing? Why are you going after this mobile device? This is not the heart and soul of VMware. Why do you care about end users? And we explained to them, okay, they kind of got it, but they were skeptical, but we persisted and we invested and we invested. Today, there's probably not a company that hasn't heard of either AirWatch, Horizon, or now what we call that combination Workspace ONE. We have 80,000 customers, tens of millions of endpoints. We just persisted and we innovated. So there's always a day of early beginnings. I mean, there was a day when server virtualization started and Diane founded the company and VMware wasn't known. Now everyone knows the VM and VMware very well 20 years later. So I never get discouraged by starting points. The point is your story and your starting point credible, right? And then we just have to persist and work really hard in an opportunity where I think the traditional players are fading. So our story of network, endpoint, cloud, this notion of intrinsic security, what the analysts call zero trust, is really resonating. I mean, you were involved, Tom, with me in shaping that story 2 years ago. We pitched it to our board. We pitched it internally. We were at several RSA conferences. You were there first, and I was there later on. And it took a lot of hard work to prep that story. Now we have about 20,000 plus customers across network, endpoint, and cloud. It's not, and $1 billion plus business that's like, oh my gosh, you are a player. We've got assets between NSX and Carbon Black and Workspace ONE and Cloud Health that are at scale, meaning not just tens of customers, thousands of customers in many of those categories. And we've got a landscape where the traditional players have hit a wall. Okay, I don't need to name them, but many of the network security companies have hit a wall because they only do firewalls. They haven't been able to sew together a vision of everything from data center networking to firewalls to load balancing to SD-WAN and what the now analysts call secure access service edge. Okay, even in just that space. Then you get to the endpoint security vendors. They've all been client server, thick client, signature-based AV architectures, not ready for cloud. And there's only one or two companies that have been able to do that at scale, Carbon Black being one of them. But quite frankly, even the other alternatives are not good at network security. So the network security guys have not understood endpoint security and they've hit a wall. The endpoint security wall have hit a wall or can't understand the network, enter VMware, right? So I feel it's a perfect storm right now for us. If we execute well, continue to show every quarter progress in this security vision of network endpoint cloud, persist, and more CISOs say, there's a company you got to take notice of because this is the company that's going to put together for the first time network endpoint cloud. Now, there could be other platform vendors that are our size. Remember, we are a $11 billion roughly company, the fifth largest software company. There's other companies bigger than us that could also do it. But I feel very good about our opportunity to either complement them in many cases, or in cases where we do overlap. I think we've got some very disruptively innovative technology that's going to leapfrog everybody in the status quo. So we've got to keep building out. In many cases, we're also acquiring companies. We've not shied away from bold acquisitions, whether it's Nicira, whether it's AirWatch, whether it's Carbon Black, whether it's Lastline, whether it's VeloCloud. These are best of breed assets. And I think the industry is starting to notice.
Now, you made mention, last question, Sanjay, I know our time is limited. You made mention, I think, of this in the beginning. You laid out a goal for yourself, a pretty ambitious goal of talking to 1,000 CISOs and CIOs this year, which is incredible and extraordinarily admirable to really understand the market. There's no market report that will tell you what 1,000 CISOs and CIOs. I'm wondering if you could just share some of the bigger things you've heard and some of your big takeaways thus far in that journey.
Yeah, I think, as I said at the outset of our discussion here, Tom, I find it to be enormously helpful to share and listen. You kind of have two ears in one mouth. And, what I've done is conducted 25, 30-minute Zoom calls. I mean, I figured initially when this started before, COVID, I would go to RSA and Black Hat and meet like 200 at a time, and I'd get to that goal faster. And then when COVID hit, I actually ironically found it easier to do some of these 25 or 30-minute calls. So my staff was able to get a list of 2,000 odd of the biggest companies, CISOs, and also some that are in not necessarily Fortune 1000, Global 2000, but are in government agencies or other big companies, ones who are influential with big budgets. And we've just, the way I've formatted that call is very simple. For the first 10 minutes, I ask them two questions. Okay, what are your top security vendors? Security priorities, and who are the top 2 or 3 security vendors you consider strategic? And that's kind of my listening opportunity before I run into my 10 or 15 minute pitch. And it's amazing when I ask them those questions. I have not heard any one vendor stand out as like across all the few hundred I've done is like, this is the one company across it. There's lots of potential. And even the smaller companies, none of them are strategic. And that's like, my goodness, that's an opportunity for us. And then the priorities usually align with much of what we've discussed during this call. Once I've understood the priorities and potentially who their core strategic vendors, and of course the team has briefed me ahead of time as to what they're using in the security landscape, I run through a 10 or 15-minute pitch that anybody could do who knows kind of what we're doing in network endpoint cloud, and lay the foundations for saying, listen, view this as a table of contents to future conversations where we can go deeper into any chapter. And invariably, in every one of them, there's an interest in 1 or 3 or 4 of these chapters. And also a little bit of a hint as to what we, seek to be doing in the future, whether it's coming out of VMworld around this whole notion of how cloud security and security work will be headed. Where does security analytics and this notion of XDR, which is a very exciting concept that I know you and the team are working through, I'm able to pull at some of those things of where we are going. And you always want to, I think, in much of what you're sharing with customers, lay a foundation for what you have done and are doing, so it doesn't feel like the future's coming out 10 years from now, but lay the hint of some of the vision things that you're going to be showing the world, not just years from now, but in the next months and quarters. And that combination has really resonated. I just got off the call before this session that we're recording with the CISO of one of the top financial services companies in the world. And his remark at the end was like, my goodness, I didn't realize this is all that you were doing. Now, of course, it's relatively new, so I don't blame him for that. But it tells me that we are starting to build awareness and a tremendous validation. And to have that person become a key influence, and I was like, this is game changing, which he said at the end of his conversation, we're on to something. So if we do it, and the other part I would say that I'm trying to role model, certainly, you do this very well, Tom, and we learn and teach from each other. The more that we could get every one of the 17,000 people in my organization who are go-to-market facing, okay, to learn the same thing. Because typically on these calls, I have our team listening in, okay? And the next one, I don't want to do myself, I want them to do. And this is how we scale. We teach and we learn and we teach and we learn, and that virtuous cycle continues to grow. And if we do that, very soon, the entire world's talking about VMware, right? That's sort of that Pied Piper phenomenon where if we can, as leaders, exemplify and role model to our teams how this is done, and then of course, iron sharpening iron. If I learn a better pitch from Tom Corn, I want to steal his idea and make it part of my pitch, which I routinely do, Tom, as you know. That's how we continue to perfect this to be something that can work. And of course, beyond just the storytelling, that's important. We have to deliver, and I'm grateful you and the team and the engineering team, whether it's on your side, Carbon Black, or the network side, or the cloud side, and the other areas, the innovation engines at VMware, these 3 or 4 areas are firing. And the idea generation of where we could do as we pitch the board and some of our internal stakeholders of some of the ideas we're thinking about, that's also very energizing. I find that entire aspect of what we are delivering and where we're going in this area of security be very, very exciting. So the sky is the limit of what I think we could do with this as a sort of a vector that we're headed down.
Well, it's always exciting to talk with you, Sanjay. I wish I could spend hours on more of these questions, but I know time is limited. Thank you so much for joining us. And I would encourage anyone who's watching, Sanjay is very prolific on Twitter and on the blogs, so please do follow Sanjay. You'll learn a ton.
And I would say, Tom, if I might interrupt you, you and I do some good music together too. Don't forget, there's a lot of parallels between security and music.
I like the guitar behind you. Sanjay, thank you so much for joining us. So greatly appreciated.